Okay. All right, is that good? Okay. We're going to call to order the Finance, Facilities, and Operations Committee meeting. So first we'll start with a roll call, please.
Mrs. McWhorter?
Here.
Mr. Updegrove?
Here.
Mr. Hemingway?
Here.
Present.
Ms. Hogan?
Present. Here.
Here.
Ms. Nyman? Mr.
Here.
Next we'll have Pledge of Allegiance and a moment of silence.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, first up we have approval of the January 14th Finance, Facilities, and Operations Committee minutes. So can I please have a motion to approve the minutes? Mr. Foos. Second, Mrs. McWhorter. Any questions, comments, or concerns about the minutes from January 14th? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Great. Next up is public comment. Do we have anybody signed up for public comment? Oh, we do. Is it Mr. Lewis?
I believe so.
Okay, Mr. Lewis, come on up, please. Welcome.
Does this have to be on the agenda specifically?
Welcome back, Mr. Lewis. Public comment number one is we only have one. So that's fine.
I'll be real quick. Dave Lou, I've never really stood here. Huh. I recently left the board, but when I was on the board, I somehow inherited the job of championing the dedication of our Bash track to the late, great Jerry Carver. And with that, some plans for a so-called, what we've been calling Gateway to Greatness. What I passed around here is actually a 3-year-old brochure based on our fundraising efforts that were, 3 years ago. We raised about $37,000, and we intended to build some sort of gateway structure to honor Jerry, and you can read a little bit more about it. I won't waste too much time here. We approved that as a board in May or so, April, May of 2017. But obviously, given the ATAM project and the change in scope, and increasing construction costs and things like that, the scope of what we originally planned and the location don't really work. So I just kind of want to keep in front of the board that what we have with the upcoming completion of the ATAM project, we have a great opportunity to complete the dedication of the track to Jerry Carver. Having said that, I think we need a little help, and I don't want to press this because I know the administration has been working with Jay Clough and KCBA trying to find an alternate location and trying to see if we can leverage fencing that will go in with ATAM and put something in and get this dedication done. But especially since we have new board members, I just wanted to get it in front of the board and remind people that this is something that I will still continue to champion. So the board leadership, I think, and Dr. Bedden, of course, has information about this. You'll probably be hearing more about it, I hope. And if not, I'll make sure I get back up here. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Thank you for continuing to work on that project.
Just as we're trying to make sure we remain consistent with guidelines, while this was related to facilities, it typically is supposed to be on something on tonight's agenda. So what should have happened is the board should have gotten consensus to still speak to it, just for future reference.
Thank you. Okay, next up we have the Boyertown Area High School additions and renovations change orders. And I guess I'll turn it over to Mrs. Pitts.
Okay, so as we continue to work toward closing out the high school project, we had received a request for payment from Sargent Enterprises for the high school project, and they had listed on that request for payment an $8,500 change order that had not been approved by the board. So we did some research in our office, and Mr. Drescher did confirm that the work had been done. This is back from 2017, actually, and it had to do with removing some asbestos tiles in the area of the display case of the ROTC, the new ROTC area. So we do want to get this project closed out. We want to make sure that the contractor is properly paid. So I'm presenting this to you tonight for any questions that you might have, and also then to seek your authority to go ahead and put this item on the consent agenda for the February voting meeting.
Mrs. Duro?
Where's the money gonna come from?
That's still from, it's within the project.
I thought we were over. We keep changing money all around. I thought we were over budget on that now.
On the high school, not to the best of my knowledge.
So the work was done.
The work was done.
Well, it's hard for me to believe that any business would wait 2 years for their money without asking. Very, very hard for me to believe that.
I don't think the application for payment came in at the same time the change order came in. But it had to do with transition in offices and, yeah.
Mrs. McWhorter?
Does this happen often where the bill, the changeover, where things get lost?
No, it does not.
Okay.
But I think this had to do a lot with the transition in the different offices. And also, we had,
Transition in different offices?
yeah, so the business office has had transition, as well as the facilities department.
Okay.
Mr. Brophy?
So this charge number is still open then, from 2014?
No, 2017, but
But
the
project-
change order, correct, yes. And we looked in the board minutes to make sure that it hadn't been previously presented, and we searched, and we could not find that it had been previously approved by the board. So that's why we want to make sure that we get it approved.
So this money's inside the project presently. It's not new money we're allocating.
No, I mean, no. It's for that project. We did sell bonds to do this project.
Correct. Okay.
And we have a fund for the high school, yes.
So what is the balance that we have in there then?
I think, taking into account what's already been spent and what we know we still owe people, it's a little bit over $1 million. And that's what we're going to need for the light.
And then this 8,500 is gonna be taken out of that little over $1 million.
Correct.
And so that'll be a little less than $1 million we have, and I thought we were looking at $1 million point something for the light.
We probably are. Now, they are looking to get a grant on the light.
Well,
So-
the township's looking to get a grant.
Correct, which would affect what we pay.
Correct, but it's not gonna be that much. I'm still having a hard time thinking any business will wait 2 years to even ask for their money.
Now, I'm not sure when the application, no, actually, I do know when the application for payment came in. It came in June. So that's when Mrs. Ritter in our office discovered this, and then we started doing the research into it.
But the work was done,
The work was done.
and it's underneath the cabinets.
And there's also some other tiles, but most of it was
So-
tile underneath the asbestos, which we
Right,
do
so-
want to take care of.
So he checked, the new maintenance guy checked that it's done.
Mr. Drescher talked to people who were present and made sure that that had been taken care of, yes.
Thank you.
So, we've had several of these for those people who are new to the board. And, I think that we have to keep in mind, since we started this high school project, we've had 3 different superintendents and about maybe 6 different CFOs and assistant CFOs over the timeline of the project. And my experience with huge projects like this is you really need to have consistency and someone at the helm, and it's usually a superintendent, who is on top of all of the people who are working on the project from the facilities. Oh, and I will say too that we've had maybe 3 or 4 different facilities people as well. So all of that turnover is really what leads to this problem. And it also is directly related to the fact when we talk about boards that are working, when you don't have boards that are working and you have turnover, and that is where all of this comes from. And when they say, you know, if you have a good board and a really good administrative staff, you can save money and have efficiency, that's really true. And I think that a lot of things have fallen through the cracks. When you don't have somebody who is managing something and holding people accountable, this is what happens. And with the turnover, especially for those years that we had an interim superintendent for almost a year, in my opinion, you know, nothing against the interim superintendent, but a lot of things get lost. So I'm hoping that this is going to be the end of it, and I'm hoping again that we're not going to be having, you know, additional. Well, we are going to be having additional turnover in our business office, unfortunately. But these things happen. There's a lot of little things that go through 3 and 4 people's hands. And to Mrs. Diroff's point, you know, who's really in charge of looking? Who's the facilities manager? Who has a list of all these things? And then you're trying to get somebody else to come in to be the next facilities manager, and that person is looking, and that person is going, you know, being held to and the CFO is talking to them, and the assistant. So I can see how this happens, and it's unfortunate. And I just hope going forward that you know, we as a board are able to understand the transitions that are taking place, and you know, work with our administrative staff to get these things straightened out. So any other questions, Mrs. Diroff?
I just would hope in the future we do this a little more professionally. There's a lot of information missing on here,
And
on these forms. I just
what
hope.
specifically, what would you like to see?
The date that the one guy from Sargent signed it, that's not on there. There's no signature for the school. There's no dates on there.
The reason there is no signature for the school is because we haven't approved it yet. So there will be one once we've approved it.
Well, there's no date on the other thing either. I mean, if you go to check back on something, I don't know how you can check without a date. And I'm not complaining to you. I'm just saying whoever's letting this stuff go, it's sloppy. And I don't want to be paying twice or paying for something that I didn't know for sure was done. Thank you.
Mr. Frick.
So the $1 million coming out, is that still on the high school project yet? For the stadium, I mean, yeah, for the building and everything? Is that part of that $1 million coming out of that?
So the balance, and I don't have the exact number, so I'm going off of memory. We sold bonds to fund the high school project, and we have an estimate about how much we still owe a couple of contractors, and we take that basically off our cash balance, and we have a little bit over $1 million. And we do know that we're going to have to fund this light up here, and that estimate came under, you know, I'm going off memory again, around $900,000, but that was several years ago. And we are waiting for, and I need to follow up Colebrookdale. I did talk to them a couple weeks ago. They were still waiting for one. They have to have release for that project. They were still waiting for one property owner. And then once that was approved, then they were able to have their engineer go out and then make another estimate on that project. And then again, they also are attempting to get some grant money to help defray the costs, because that cost is basically passed on to us.
Mr. Foos?
Am I correct that for the high school project, we did settle the various outstanding issues and?
For Stubner, yes. Stubner.
Okay, so this is outside. So
this is Sargent, yes, and I do believe there is one other contractor. So we need to, yeah, we need to check on what the status of that one is as well.
Okay, yeah, if we can get that cleared up, the sooner we can get this closed out, I think the better.
I agree.
So it looks like looking at the change order, it looks like it was when you look at the dates. So it looks like it was submitted on May 3rd, 2017. And basically, it fell through the cracks and it was never brought to the board for approval. Is that correct, Ms. Smith?
Yes, that is correct, yes.
Okay. So is there anybody who is opposed to moving this forward? All right, seeing none, you have direction to move it forward. The next item up for discussion is the district audit services, and we do need a decision. And I will let Mrs. Pitts talk about that as well.
Okay, so we always, every year, have to have our financials audited by an outside auditing service. So last June, the board approved an extension of the Barbicane contract, and that was only for 1 year. So that was for the records that would be for the fiscal year that was ended June 30th, 2019. So instead of waiting till June, I wanted to bring this forward to get some guidance from the committee. Let me know what you want us to do. We can do several things, and there are a lot of considerations when you are deciding what to do with your auditors. It is probably a good thing to periodically have a new set of auditors looking at your books, and we did do that. Barbicane started with us, I think it was fiscal year ended June 30th of 2015. I think that's in my notes here. So they've been auditing us for about 4 years. So I think that's well within the reasonable guideline. I would say 10 years is probably about when you should look at having another set of auditors. So that being said, you could still go out for a request for proposal, see what other auditors are out there that might be interested in auditing our books. That gives us the opportunity to maybe compare costs. I will say, as Mrs. Denon alluded to, I'm sure the committee knows, but maybe members of the public do not know, that I have decided to retire in July. So I will not be here for the audit of this fiscal year. When you change auditors, there's some baseline work that they need to do. So the first year that they come in is a little, it's more work than a normal audit would be. And let me tell you what, a regular audit is an awful lot of work. An awful lot of preparation goes in there. So I would not recommend for this year going out for an RFP. And so there are other choices. We could go out for a 1-year extension like we did last year, or we could go out for a 2-year extension. And my recommendation, it would be to go out for a 2-year extension. And I did talk to Mr. Kowalczyk when he was here giving the presentation on the annual financial report in December. And the reason I'm saying that is, number one, for the first year when we have a new CFO here doing their audit for the first time, they're not having to worry about having a new set of auditors coming in. And then for the second year, so that that new CFO is not sitting here at the same time next year worrying about getting an extension. So my recommendation would be for requesting a 2-year extension and getting prices for that. But I certainly am agreeable to anything else the committee would like us to do. So I'm just looking for guidance, and then we'll bring that to you once we have results.
Any questions or comments? I would tend to defer to Mrs. Pitt's recommendation.
I complained last year that we didn't put this out for bid, and I think it should be put out because they get very comfortable after a while, the auditors, and we were told that before, and we had the other company for quite some time, and that's why we changed. And I would be, 2 years I don't think is good. I think we should get a 3-year bid, but that's my feelings. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? My only comment would be, and I understand your point about the auditor, and I think last time we actually had them for like 10 years, so it was really important that we put out an RFP. We've had these for 5. My only concern is that it's just more work for everybody to put it out. So if that was only one of my concerns. And the fact that Mrs. Pitts is retiring. So, any other questions or comments? Go ahead.
I'm sorry, just another comment, and I don't mean this derogatory towards you, or towards who we're going to hire next. But there's no guarantee they're going to be here for longer than a year either. I mean, I can't go for that.
business person?
Yeah,
Yeah,
so I
yeah,
can't
you're
go
correct.
for, well, let's get somebody in here because you don't want to have a new person wasting all their time and so forth. Which I understand what she's saying, but we still have no guarantee the other way, and I'm all for getting a bids for 3 years, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Brophy?
If we do put out a bid to put out the RFP, are we then obligated to take the low bid? Or can we continue on with where we are? If we can continue on with where we are, I'd be interested in putting out the bid just to see who'd be interested and what the cost they would be for, for future changes. We don't have to make the change, but we can at least see if we got interest out there.
For an RFP, you do not have to take the lowest.
I wasn't sure how that state rules went.
Yep.
Just with respect to whoever's coming in, although, I appreciate Mrs. Darrell's thoughts that it doesn't matter, because there's nothing guaranteed. But I think that we do want to keep their stress coming in as low as possible, make them more comfortable as they learn the parts of their job. I think it's wiser to stick with these guys. That's all.
I tend to agree with Ms. Deroff. I don't think there's and also Mr. Brophy, as far as getting to see what the prices are out there, as long as we do have that option to continue with what we have. I don't think there's any harm. Now, I know you said there is work in preparing, so we'd have to use your guidance to help me understand, is that effort worth what we think the outcome would be of finding a better price?
Well, when you do look at what the price was last year, it was $20,750. I think that's a pretty reasonable price for our size. I don't know that there's a lot of savings out there. I suppose there's a potential of some.
Okay, well then, with that being said, I trust your recommendation.
Okay, anyone else? Okay, just raise your hand. All those in favor of moving this forward for the 2-year, going with the recommendation of administration, just show a hand so we.
And that would be an
Did you have a
extension.
Did you have a comment, Mr.?
Yeah, are you talking about a 2-year extension on Barclay that we already have?
That would be asking Barbicane to give us, yeah, that's okay, to give us a quote for 2 years. And I certainly appreciate Mrs. Deroff's point. There is no guarantee that the person who follows me will stay. So if you would be more comfortable with a 1 year, I'm certainly amenable to that as well.
But then we still have to go out and look for another company after that.
That is correct, yes. Yes, we'd have to make that decision around this time again next year.
Okay, so we're still at the at this particular, the way it's written here. So just a show of,
1 year or 2 year?
The recommendation was 2.
the recommendation was a 2-year proposal to push out for 2 more years. So can I just have a show of hands if who's interested in moving it forward as it is? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, everybody but Mrs. Deroff is no. Okay. All right, so we have a majority to move it forward, so we're going to move that forward. The next is the Berks County Intermediate Unit 2020 mandated school district services budget, and we do need a decision. This is, kind of, we do this every year. I will just speak to this a little bit. I sit on the Berks County Intermediate Unit Board, and this year their budget is $1,901,899. Our share of the proposed cost for next year is $1,496.76. And I do want to point out that the IU does a really good job of holding their costs, and this will be the same cost as last year, so we are not seeing an increased rate. And for those of you who have looked at the budget that was handed out last week by the IU, you will notice that we pay a large share, and that's because we have some of the, I think we have, our services are, we use the IU. So we have, and just like the BCTC, the more services you get from the different organizations, the more it is. But it is a mandate that we have IUs in the state. It started years ago, and as you can see, they do curriculum development, instructional improvement. I believe, I'm not sure, but the PSBA, did they do your training, your new training? So they do that as well. So
Well, they provided the facility, they didn't actually do training.
oh, okay. I didn't know that. I know that they were talking about having some of their people do it, but they just provided the facility, and then people from PSBA did the training. Okay. Anything else, Mrs. Pitts, you wanted to add to that?
Nope.
Mr. Cruz?
I did want to note that we do partner with the IU for our cyber charter with Mr. Stout, which Mr. Stout was able to negotiate pretty favorable terms, and I think we have a pretty good partnership with them on that. And they also provided some guidance in our superintendent search that was pretty valuable. So we do have a really good relationship with them, and I think that our students definitely benefit from that relationship.
I guess I should give them props on their guest teacher program too. They've been good to me, and they do control all the guest teacher stuff.
I agree.
They answer questions all the time, and I have lots of them. So
You could still be a guest teacher in another district. So you could still work with them.
yeah, I go from a paying job to a non-paying job. Like the business.
You are. Okay, so is there anybody who's opposed to moving that forward? I don't see anyone. Okay, so you have direction to move that forward. Moving on, we have our, and I'm going to let Mrs. Pitts address this. This is our quarterly financial review. It's something that we started in the past couple of years to look at where we are in our budgeting process at the quarter. So this is the quarterly review, and I'll turn it over to Mrs. Pitts.
I think we just started that in October, so this is, to my best, to the best of my knowledge, it's only the second time. So, and I do apologize to people in the audience. These slides were not exactly made to be a presentation. So the board committee did receive this. What's that? Oh, you're right. You just can't see it on the screen very well, unfortunately. So this just gives us a little bit of an opportunity to dig a little bit deeper into how our financials are going beyond the treasurer's report that we do each month. So the very first report that I do is a side-by-side year-to-year comparison so that we can take a look at our trends and see how we're doing. And this was really an excellent time for me to be doing this. Okay. Okay. So it did give me an opportunity, because part of what we added to this review was to update the projections for the year. So there was a lot that went into this review that also pertain to our 2021 budget. So when we look at our side-by-side revenues, we see a couple areas that stand out. One is that we are ahead of where we were percent of budget-wise for our real estate tax revenues, collections, and you'll see a little bit more of that further on. The December 31st is the end of the penalty period, although we would not have received all of our taxes by then, because people do pay at the very end, and the tax collectors also have to honor postmarks. So we will also have some of our regular real estate that would have been paid in the penalty period that we will also be receiving in the month of January, and you'll see that on the January Treasurer's Report. But you will see as a percent of budget that we are doing better than last year. We've done done very well with our real estate tax collections this year. Also, I want to point out that our earned income tax is also doing very well. And I'll talk about that in more detail because I do have another slide or another page where I look at that a little bit more in depth. So when we look at one thing I do want to point out is when I did the narrative for the board that went into your packet, I did say that tax receipts are 6.7 ahead for earned income, or ahead of 6.7% ahead of where we were last year. And that is for the actual receipts that we had received through December. So in December, we actually receive the November collections because they have to wait till the end of the month before Earned Income Tax Bureau transmits them to us. In the review that I did for Earned Income Tax, I also included the December collections because I did know those, even though we did not receive them till January. So when I talk about 6.7 ahead of the prior year, that's actually for the receipts that we had in December. Then we look at expenditures. One of the areas that jumped out to me was the data processing services. And I do want to remind the committee that we did have the purchase of the phone system that was installed before the end of this year. So that cost is in there as well. So that's why you see that ahead of where it was last year. And library services seems to be a little bit behind of where it was the previous year. And that has a lot to do with the fact that we have moved a lot of our library clerks to be CRES employees. And CRES, we're not paying the employees directly, we're paying CRES. So there is a little bit of a lag compared to where we would have been with payroll in the prior year. So this is a chart of where we were with our tax collection rate. And if you remember when we talked about this in October, I had looked at the end of the discount period because that was all I had at that time. We were slightly behind, but that didn't worry me too much at that time. You look at that trend, we maybe were a little higher in the discount period last year than we had been even in the previous year. So I wasn't worried about that. If you see where we were at the end of the flat compared to the previous 2 years, we were a little bit ahead there, and you can see just a tiny bit ahead of where we were the previous 2 years for where we were at the end of the penalty. And I am basing that on the reports that we receive from the tax collectors, not on those receipts that we looked at in December, because as I mentioned, we will be receiving some of that money, or we would have received some of that money in January. So we are slightly ahead of where we've been in the past. It wasn't enough for me to really think that it would be something that we would want to consider changing the collection rate in our budget. We have to take into effect that collection rate not only includes how well we do collecting the tax bills that we issued, but also how many people paying the discount, because there is a 2% 2% discount. And the people who pay in the penalty, there's a 10% penalty. But we also have to keep into account that we also, the assessments appeals that we may pay would affect that rate that we use in the budget as well. All right, this is where and I did not change the top there. That should say December 31st, 2019. I thought I had changed that, so I apologize. This is as of December. You can see that November we did have that 6.7 receipts that would have been in our pocket before the end of December. There was a little bit of a change with the collections for December that we received in January, but we're still very healthy, 4.56% of where we were last year. And that affected my projections for where I think we will be this year. I do believe that we will collect about 7.8 million in real estate, or I'm sorry, earned income this year. All right, so now here's a 5-year projection, which is what I updated as part of this review. And I have to laugh a little bit about this projection because this was my projection for the current fiscal year. I don't think will have changed very much. I based the out years on the budget as it stood as of January 29th. And you will see further on that we've made some changes, and we also had a bit of news today that will affect our budget. So one of the things I also wanted to point out is I did this it was in the January 31st newsletter. And the projections, you'll see the assumptions later on, are based a lot on the independent fiscal office's projections for the base Act 1 index. And the independent fiscal office, or IFO, also just updated and published a new projection on February 6th. So I did write down their original projections from last year for 21-22 was 2.8 base Act 1 index, and for 22-23 was 3.0, and for 23-24 was 3.2. And I did stop in my projection for 23-24 because that was the last year that I had an IFO projection. The new publication increased 2021 from that 2.8 to 3.2. And that'll affect our revenues as well as our salaries. For 22-23, then that 3% went to 3.3%, and from 23-24, it went from 3.2 to 3.4, and the new projection for 24-25 for the base Act 1 index is 3.5%. So. Obviously, this is a pretty intensive projection. It takes a lot of work. It's not something we want to be doing every time, but we will see some differences when I do this again for the next quarterly report. So let's go right to the bottom. You'll see where the surplus that I'm projecting for this year is $494,000, and that is primarily based on those favorable results that I'm projecting for our real estate taxes as well as our earned income taxes. The budget for 2021, as it stood on January 21st, was a $929,000 deficit, and then it went basically to $1 million the next year, $1.4 million, and then $1.6 million. And you'll see this in a little bit more condensed, nicer chart on my budget update presentation as well. These were my assumptions that I would use that Act 1 index based on the IFO projections that I just outlined for you. That the earned income tax would have about a 3.5 annual income or annual increase. I think I've talked a little bit about in the budget and in the projections, we want to be realistic but conservative. That is an area that I continue to look at. It is an area that we may want to adjust. That when Pine Forge is sold, that money will not go into the general fund, but it will be deposited into a capital projects fund to fund other capital projects. In this particular projection, I use 3% for other staff, and I use the current association agreement for the professional staff. For benefits, we used the 8% increase, which was what was in the original preliminary budget that was approved last month. And then I used the projections from PEASers for the out years for the pension costs. And then I have some based on trends, the increases in those other, we call them major objects, but in those other areas that we purchase things in. And we use the real debt schedule for that portion. Okay, so that is basically my kind of quick overview of the financial review for this for this quarter ended December 31st.
Okay, questions or comments? Mr. Foos?
Just that I appreciate this being something that we've now committed to doing. It's a really good, informative update. So thank you for the time that went into it.
Ms. Brophy?
Okay, that 2 million projection, that's just a projection. You don't have any offers, correct?
No, we do not.
Just check.
Kind of answer, Mr. Murphy. And just that number was a number that was given based on an estimate of property value. So just that, you didn't ask that, but how do we come up with a number too is important for people to know. And again, that's an option. Doesn't mean you're going to do that, but that's, if you do that, it has a $2 million value to it that was estimated. Could be more, could be less once a decision is made to get appraisal and do whatever you want to do.
Yeah, my only concern is that we've just made a major change to move kids through all different schools. If we sell that building right away, we have no backup plan. That's my only concern with that. We're now, if something doesn't work or we overfill our schools, we're now forced into building something. That's my only concern with that, of giving up the building.
And I would just say that the reason I said it the way I said it is, that's if you all do that. But I do want to remind that, and I'm going to go on record as saying it again, we don't have the resources to build. In fact, the PlanCon, and I verified, and I will tell you that I uncovered that the PlanCon for the elementary school in Montgomery County never was pulled off the rolls. It was officially as of a couple weeks ago. When I got on the phone with PlanCon. So there was a board motion. It was still lingering out there. The administration hadn't done anything with it, but the point is it was not removed, and we had it officially removed. The Colbrookdale plan is still there, which is an addition as an option, but I want to remind people, being transparent, that the position this administration took was that I don't believe that we could effectively jump out there and obligate taxpayers to a potential, because you can't take borrowing money back. But I want to go on record again as saying what I said publicly, but it does mean that if the growth does spur, we're playing catch up. And so we will have to do things like, again, significant busing and rerouting. The next line of defense would be buying time with portables, but I would tell you portables are meant to be temporary, not permanent. That would then buy time to address the idea of trying to go out and then reactivate the addition onto Colbrookdale, just to remind people of the three-tiered approach that we had talked about, giving that we don't have, we have the borrowing capacity, we don't have the payment resources, to be clear. So we have the capacity to borrow, because that we have enough by state code and the way the formula is written to actually borrow. We just don't have the payment capacity without devastating other areas within our program.
Mrs. Giroux?
I think there was a problem too with modulars. Some of the townships don't want those at all anymore. I know, I forget which township it was. They said, don't come back and ask again. So we would have a problem there. Carol, where would I find, Mrs. Pitts, where would I find the, for Peasers? Because we'll be paying a lot less because of Crest. Where would I find that?
Okay, so that I don't have broken out here. I can do that if you'd like.
No, I just
Okay.
wondered if there was
I did
someplace
not
would
break
see
that
it.
out, no.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much this is something we've been asking for a while. And so thank you very much for doing this.
And there is more I want to add, and it goes back to your point too. I wanted to add it for this quarter, and I just flat out ran out of time with the budget, is adding another sheet that shows us where we stand with our money in our construction funds and with what we have committed to, and then how much money is left. So that is something I do want to add for April.
Thank you.
Yeah, I had, when Mrs. Pitts and I were talking, and again, it was a matter just of time trying to get this together. And as part of this review, at one of our facilities and finance meetings, we're actually going to have kind of a one-pager that shows the construction project, what the budgeted cost was, where we are, what we have left, and then all of our different funds, because we have capital projects, technology, we have our fund to pay our health care, and then we have our general fund, which is our savings. So for those people who are new on the board, I think it would be helpful, and for all of us too, just to see those numbers, just like you do at home. Well, what's in this savings account? What's in this savings account? And so hopefully at a future meeting we'll be getting that information. But again, I really appreciate this, Mrs. Pitts. It's a lot of work, but it's very helpful for the board to see where we are. Questions or comments? This was just an informational item. There's no need for us to take any action. And then the next, we're going to move into the 2020-2021 budget update.
All right, so in your packets, it does include the slides from our presentation from last month that talks about how we got to where we were for the preliminary budget. I'm not going to go through that. I am going to remind you that that was a budget that was presented with two things. At that time, it was a 1.414 deficit, and it also included a tax increase based on an estimated amount that we would be eligible for referendum exceptions, and that was $640,000. So I just want to refresh everybody on how that preliminary budget was. So we've been, yes, ma'am.
Well, mine says January, and on there it says February.
That's because I'm starting from, remember how I said we included the slides from the first? So yeah, I am starting on slide 14.
Okay, but on which thing? You have two. there.
Oh, I think they're the same.
You just should scroll forward, Ms. Durham. It's on the same PowerPoint.
Right, just keep going.
Yes, it's the same, it's one PowerPoint. If you go to slide 14, you'll be on the same slide as me. That's okay, I apologize. You're fine. So, we want to talk about where we are today. And I will tell you, this is a very dynamic budget. So remember I showed you the projections, and we had $929,000 deficit when I made the projections. And then I had a whole bunch of things change, but we do have to kind of stop some things as we go. So this is that projection that I just talked about in the quarterly financial review, just in a little bit more condensed format. So this will be a little bit easier for the people who are attending tonight outside the board to see. So those are the same where I said we had the $929,000 deficit, and it also shows where our fund balance ends up. So that's just, again, it was a good thing for me to be working on the quarterly review while I was working on the budget. Okay, so these are some of the things that we have done since the preliminary budget to bring us down in expenditures. So I did that budget, I believe, was January 29th. Dr. Kim and I had a conference call with Tryon on the 31st. It looks like we're going to have some more favorable health insurance rates than that 8% that we used in the preliminary budget. We're very hopeful that this will be better, but again, we're going with a realistic amount that's going to be a little bit conservative. So we did bring down that increase down to 5% from the 8% that we used in the preliminary budget. I'm going to touch on the earned income tax revenue estimate. As I said, I am projecting that this year we will receive $7.8 million. So from that preliminary budget, I added another $200,000 to the revenue side of that. Now, Dr. Bed, did you want to talk to some of those other items?
So we, as always, we want to make sure that we are showing what are we doing rather than just asking for more money in this process. So as where there are opportunities to make staff reductions, we have. So for example, one of the ones this past year that I'll just use as a frame of reference was when we had a FTE reduction in our art program, and we did not fill that position because looking at the available class offerings and the staffing that was still available, for example, the principal said I could still function without it, as an example. So we have things like that. So we didn't put anybody out, but when we had a chance with a natural movement to look at and say, can we do this differently, that has happened. You will see in the HR meeting, as we alluded to, some modifications, reallocations to continue to address our movement for our SEL, social emotional learning, and our student service supports. A lot of that has been trading off and repurposing stuff rather than asking for new money to address our desire to do more in that area. And it's also going to give you'll see some supports to our larger elementary schools that are sitting 600-700 kids. I mean, they're literally approaching the size of our middle schools, and you have one administrator, but it will be a model that stays away from adding another Act 93 administrator, but frees up some resources to support the building with culture, climate, and then in absence of the principal. Program modifications and restructuring. That also will go on with modifications of our specialized programs. You will probably get some calls. There will be some people who are not happy. But again, we got to make some programmatic changes and do it differently, because we can't just say there's always the same amount of money that's available. The team has worked hard to make some adjustments to our gifted program and still remain in compliance. Do we think that what we were doing was a great opportunity? It absolutely was, but we can't sustain it with the cost factor of what we were doing. So we're going to have to make modifications. I'm going to give you a heads up. That's a core group of families that probably would want to keep it the way it is. But just like, we've had a school and make a sacrifice, we're having to share the burden across the district to try to live within our means. You heard earlier, doing the right sizing process, we were shifting some of our special ed programs to be in alignment where the kids actually go throughout the district. So that has already been in the works to make that happen, and again, remain in compliance. And I would have to say that IT and facilities have done a yeoman's job of continuing always trying to figure out how I can do it differently, how to cut costs. We've had a lot of that continue on their part, but at the same time, we have to be careful, because if you cut those people too much, you actually are impacting schools and their ability to function, because they still have to have a certain amount of level of resources to be able to function in their capacity to serve schools. That's just kind of a snapshot, but I'm just giving you a heads up that as we're meeting with people and programs, you may get the BASD, school board, at whatever the email is, but we got to tighten our belt. They can't just be give, and we're asking people to do it differently. But we remain in compliance. It's just doing the programs differently. And you'll hear a little bit later, the middle school, we've had a challenge. One middle school is growing fast in size and in student enrollment. The other one is smaller. The changes that have been made thus far in the proposal that was presented this past week by those two principals actually makes the class sizes more equitable across both middle schools now, and buys us a couple years potentially as we keep watching the growth on one side of the county to deal with it. And it means that we're going to have to shift teachers around. And some teachers, if you're good, you can work good in any building. You're a middle school teacher, we need to move you to another middle school for your certification ability to serve our students. That's what we're looking at. But in the absence of doing that, we would have had to add 2 more teachers, which is $200,000+, and we just can't do it. We don't have it. So we're restructuring using available resources. So that will be a little change for about 4 or 5 people at the middle school level. They may have to switch schools, but again, it's making class size equitable, and it's also making sure that both programs are not having to totally abandon the middle grades teaming model, which is what the district went to several years ago, because the other option was to dismantle it altogether, which is not the best instructional model. And so we're trying to hold on to that model as best can. So it's a little bit of a hybrid that they came up with to try to keep the best of both worlds, get class sizes under control, but also keep the strongest instructional model somewhat intact for both schools.
So that's what we've been working on to bring the expenditures and what's to fine tune? Oh, the next one's yours too. Okay, all right, then I'll let you go with it.
And we thought it was important to always remind people of some of the challenges that are contributing to this. I will tell you that even when you look at the projections of the deficits, if you go back and look at prior presentation, it actually is still better. I mean, those numbers, we don't like them, those red numbers, but they actually are better than they had previously been predicted. So we're chipping away at it, making progress at it and trying to get our house in order. But as you know, the cost of employees, salary increases between collective bargaining and also agreement, and also trying to make sure our support staff are competitive. Benefits go up. The good news is not as much as we had thought. But we, as Carol said, we plugged in a conservative number, waiting until we get through the other half of the year, because if you have a catastrophic event, it could throw that all out of whack. And then we want to save that to make sure that there's no other market shifts before we lock into a final number on the medical benefits and costs. PCERS, while it's slow, it is still going up. So, but it is a smaller increase, but no matter how they spend it, it still went up again. It's almost a third of the cost, and it still is one of the major cost drivers. The interesting dynamic that you'll find here, see later, the bad news and the good news that we got was our special ed. Typically, if you're special ed, you're required services that when you get certain children come in, you got to give the services to them and remain in compliance. The good news, or you want the bad news first?
Yeah, it was a bad.
The bad is we don't qualify this year for exceptions, and you'll see the impact of that. We did not change the slide because that's not what you all received. We just figure we tell you. We'll make the adjustment. Then I got to figure out how to fix it, so we didn't want to tell you to change the slide and don't have an answer to how we're going to fix it. And all we do is make the deficit look bigger, and I didn't need that negative number looking at me. It was a SEL moment for me when she told me today what happened. The good news is the reason why. To get exceptions, your special ed cost has to grow beyond your Act 1 index, adjusted Act 1 index. We didn't this year. And our legal costs were down. There are a number, I'm doing this from memory, several.
Legal cost was a big one, guidance, and we think that may have been to do with a retirement of a higher cost employee, and also a little bit of the curriculum instruction that applies to special ed. And I think that had a lot to do with some personnel vacancies and turnover in the previous year. So, and it is based on 17-18 compared to 18-19 results.
So the big driver is litigation and need for lawyers to be involved is probably the biggest number. The other one obviously can go up or down. I mean, people leave and come and go the cost of employees, but we weren't paying as much money for legal issues. So it's a good thing. Our transportation costs, it was across the state in this budget, it's being leveled to limited funding from the state. In fact, PASBO presented today, and you all have in front of you, yes. And I encourage you to look at it, but one of their issues is that the state is falling behind in their responsibilities to reimburse school district for transportation costs. In fact, they liken it to the treatment of what happened with PlanCon that's going on. As you know, charter school payments, that's brick and mortar and cyber. Our biggest driver is cyber for us, but that is still a contributor to this. We held the line on about maintaining or trying to improve our equitable class sizes for our elementary and middle school. We had the ability to save money if we wanted to by raising class sizes. We throughout this whole process said we were going to try to maintain our staffing ratios for class sizes. So rather than use that as a mechanism to address savings at this point, we kept it the same. We typically ran the data, and I had them pull for 5 and 10 year data analysis. We have averaged typically about 11 retirements. We only got 3 this year. And even if you replace those positions, typically, usually when someone's retiring, they have a higher salary than someone you get behind it. So we didn't garner those type of savings. And honestly, the mandates. You got a sample of mandates. You got all of them, but some of them are somewhat unfunded. One of the proposals coming now from the governor is a great thing with universal early childhood, but guess what? They didn't put any money in it. So we're made to do it. Now we got good intentions, but how are we going to pay for it if we have space issues? So those types of things are still creating challenges. So that back to the Carol show. Oh, I'm sorry. It is. Oh, the next one is mine. Fields too. So we're still looking for savings. I told you we're holding a line on the health insurance rate until we get farther in, before we claim any more good news from them. Final staffing. We will continue to scrub and look for opportunities through natural attrition and or changes in our model. Like, for instance, you will actually see some changes where we have had some overtime that we pay that we're repackaging those positions, which really should be salaried positions, to avoid that you'll see in the next week in the HR committee that will basically repurpose and structure those positions. We won't hurt the employee. We looked at what they were getting, but we're changing it, so going forward, we won't be incurring overtime costs for those positions, because as salary goes up, overtime will cost you more, which means piecers cost you more. So we gotta hold them harmless through this transition process, but garner savings going forward by repurposing and recategorizing the position. And again, we're still working on the middle school model. They changed it and brought a model in Monday that actually helped us save the need for 2 positions. We hope we're there, and it doesn't have any more changes. We are continuing to look at our transportation service model. There are some things that we know that we need to do differently that we're not doing that create a safety issue. And then there are other things I've asked them to look at that we'll talk about that we may phase in, so we won't be flipping the cart all at once on people. But if you ever, anybody ever ridden behind one of our buses? You see how frequently they stop? I mean, literally, and in some cases, I will tell you that our bus drivers really are not having sometimes the movement to get their flashers out and their stop arms the way they should. I think it's 150 to 200 feet. Is it? The regs say, Brian?
150 to 300.
Yeah, and you know, we got some stops that are less than that we're addressing for that, and we've been somewhat overly accommodating at times, and we just need to do better, and we will make some changes, but we'll do it thoughtfully, and we're not trying to, you know, turn the rug upside down, but you know, that's a cost driver that we can control a little bit more by our decision making. And again, it's about sharing the burden. Everybody's getting a little bit to give, a little bit, make adjustments to get it under control. But we will always, you know, stay in compliance. But we also need to look at how we can do it differently and be more efficient at it. But some people will probably not be happy because they're used to having it a certain way.
All right, so this is what Dr. Bedden was alluding to, where we didn't really change the slide. However, as of this morning, I have learned that we will not qualify for special ed exceptions. So that's, as Dr. Bedden said, a little bit of good news, a little bit of bad news. The good news is that our special ed costs weren't escalating faster than the adjusted Act 1 index, so that's a good thing. That does mean, though, and this is, I know from Mrs. Deeroff's point of view, going to be a little bit of a good thing, bad thing as well. That will increase what our deficit currently is, despite the fact that we had been doing a lot of these things that we talked about. Making the adjustment for the change in the healthcare was probably the largest thing that we did to bring the expenditures down since you saw the preliminary budget till today. It's just that estimated exceptions, which I based on what we were eligible for last year, did not come to fruition for this year. So that means that we will not be able to raise our taxes beyond the adjusted Act 1 index of 3.2%. So it's difficult because we have that deficit. We need to continue to look at ways that we can address it. That's a challenge, but it is also good for our taxpayers. So it's a good thing, bad thing. So this is just kind of an overview of where we were from the preliminary budget. So you had a very similar slide in the initial presentation. I just added that column about where we stood last week on February 5th. And as I had mentioned, we had in the other local revenue that earned income tax based on my projections for this year, and that continued favorable trend that we've been seeing added $200,000. We did do through some attrition and some of those program changes that Dr. Bedden talked about. And we did have a couple of grandfathered employees who have put in their retirement, and one grandfathered employee who put in their retirement and became, that position will become a CRES employee. So that does impact the revenue as well, because if we are paying less in expenditures, we're also getting less subsidy for Social Security and retirement. And also just because of the changes in the way we've allocated some of the people, the federal revenue went down a little bit as well. So This is where we were between the preliminary budget and where we stood last week, and the expenditures, and again, that's salaries and benefits that went down, really primarily due to that change in the increase in the health insurance, but also some of the retirements and the modifications that we were made or able to make in delivery of programs. And then we see the professional services go up. That really is that change from that grandfathered employee who that position will now become a CRESS employee. The purchase services, that actually was really not a deduction. It was a move between those objects that are listed down on the left side. We had to move some money from one line to another line. And then we did have discovered an increase, an unknown increase in a software program that we needed to add back into the budget. So it says supplies and textbooks, but that just happens to be the object where software is recorded. So we did, from the preliminary budget, reduce almost $600,000 in expenditures. It's just that was pretty much offset by our inability to go for Act 1 exceptions. So we continue to have some challenges coming up. We're continuing to evaluate everything and make sure, again, that we have things in there in a reasonable but conservative, both on the revenue and on the expenditure side. So that is that for the budget update.
Mr. Bruce?
So on slide 17, the state and federal revenue with the revised budget, are those based on the recent president and governor's proposed budgets, or are those just based on?
So what I did for that is, and I should have mentioned that, I apologize. I did take, the IU had given us some estimates, so I did use those for our basic ed and our special ed funding. However, we did get a lower estimated payment for our transportation subsidy this year, which is also going to affect, because I based, the budget for the transportation subsidy on the prior year. So what I basically did was offset the transportation subsidy with the increase that we received based on the governor's budget. So those offset each other. And that amount that I pointed out that we did go down in state subsidy is tied to the FICA and Social Security, FICA and retirement subsidy based on the salary and benefit reductions that we made. So,
okay. Do we have any indication at this point what the reception to the state budget has been like as far as the legislature? Because I know that there were some things that the governor has continuously tried to put in there that has faced a lot of resistance, and some things that I think would likely be well received, but I anticipate that the final budget will look somewhat different than what was proposed.
You want me? Well, absolutely, the final budget will look different. So the feeling, and I say feeling, not Dana Benton's, our general theme is, and as you may have seen in the paper, we're thankful for the increases, but it doesn't go far enough because our costs are still escalating with things that we can't control faster than we have revenue. So it's killing us locally, tax-wise. And the big three still are special ed, PCERS, and charter that are growing faster than. And I actually do have the slide now from PASBO that was finally sent to us, presentation they gave us today that I can send out to you all. You'll see some of what they're talking about. So they consider the typically they say the governor's proposal is like the ceiling. So it isn't going to go more than that. It's probably going to come down lower. This year they say it's probably because it was very reasonable actually, that it may not go a lot lower. They would hope and think, but the hot ticket items are the charter. Something's going to be done, even to the point that they realize that something's got to be done. The charter side, that there's enough sentiment to do something different. What that looks like, it won't be exactly what he proposed. So when you hear $280 million worth of savings, it's not going to be that. For cyber people, they were projecting 133 potential million in savings, with about 470 districts getting some reduction. we're not going to get all that. So that's going to be different. They absolutely do not feel that the minimum wage is going to go to 12. They think it'll move, but it won't go to $12. And as you know, for the new members, we actually looked at how many of our people fit that. But what people have to understand is that while we have a handful that are like 10 and some change, and still below the 12, you're almost influencing people because their whole thing. Unless you're either going to get compression or you got to move the whole thing. So then that costs the entire centering of your salary schedule. So it's not just as simple of, I would take Jill Denton and say, I'm going to give her $12 because she's under it. But other people are like, well, wait a minute, type thing. So they're not seeing that one, maybe going all the way, but maybe some movement in it. I'm trying to think what else they talked about today.
I think the main thing was, the transportation subsidy is not going to be there, and so it was $100 million increase in basic education funding. And
sounds like a lot, but it's not.
And again, it's not. You got 500, school districts, so it's not a lot of money. And like Dr. Bedin said, that's the ceiling. So, the governor put some, I guess we would say, bargaining chips. The capping cyber charters at 9,000. So he put some things in there that they're going to use to negotiate. So it's all going to be a negotiation. It's probably going to be a compromise at the end. I don't see that there's going to be that much movement. I don't think we'll see the whole 100 million.
And the other big hit that was disappointing, we were all in a frantic last year and the year before that about safety.
Oh yeah.
It's got zero.
And I think that it was 60 million last year, right? And he put zero, and I think that's going to be his bargaining chip. That's going to be a bigger bargaining chip, I think, than anything. And again, those if people want to talk about safety and mandates, you got to put some money up. School districts are just not going to have. That was a big cost driver, I think. For us even. I mean, I think we ended up spending something like $350,000 additional money on safety. We got a $25,000 grant. I mean, big deal. That was the minimum that people were getting when they went to apply for those grants. So then there was this big talk about changing how you apply for the grants, and then more people, would get more money. But again, when you look at Harrisburg and how Harrisburg works, school safety now has become a $3 billion business. So there's a lot of competition to get, there's so many different things. When you go to these professional developments and they have a lot of seminars on how to protect our kids, and it's everything from, clear backpacks to, some type of special stuff you put on your windows. It's just amazing, like all the different things that you can do to keep kids safe.
Some of the uncovered cost is associated with the mandates for training and things that we have to try to figure out how to get that into the schedule. Right. And at the end of the day, you're either taking time away. Thankfully we changed the calendar last year at the board's approval to get the trauma piece in, but I believe that's annually, isn't it? That that we got to figure things like that. So either build it in and lose time somewhere else, or because if you do it after school, you don't have to pay people. And that's the challenge. We keep telling them that when you throw in these additional trainings, which may be, again, for a good cause, but the reality is you didn't give us any more resources, or how do we fit it in? Because one of the criticisms has been when they come out with these, they forget the collective bargaining agreements that we just can't supersede and just say, you got to do it. But either do it on the time and change your calendar, or you got to pay people because of the collective bargaining agreement.
And I think the other thing that doesn't really affect us is the minimum wage for teachers that the governor is proposing. Again, no money, but school districts who are maybe in more rural or western part of the district who are not paying their teachers at the minimum that the governor wants, that's going to be another unfunded mandate. So I think school boards and and PASBO and PSBA and all these groups, superintendent organizations are all saying, yeah, you know, we want full day kindergarten, we want to pay our teachers great, but where's the money coming from? So it's you know, it sounds nice, but to me, it's disappointing.
And I brought
So we're scheduled to get what, $297,000 more for basic ed? Is that,
Did you just divide that by 500 basically?
no, it was in the
she's talking
newspaper.
about just for our.
For Boyer's
Oh, for our
Town.
district.
Yeah, I don't care what the rest is.
Yeah, I think that's probably. I think that was right.
It seems
It seems-
actually.
Seems a little bit high, but
But somewhere
But that's
possibly
what-
lower.
that's what
Well,
the,
then it was 257, if it wasn't 290, it was 2 something.
that's what, yeah, and that's if the 100,
That's right.
yeah, and that's if the 100 million, that's assuming that the budget
Yeah.
passes, yeah.
Right, that is related to the study that was done for our support staff, that is to bring them to competitive wages for people in the area. And I think there was a presentation on the compensation study.
So we paid $100,000 for that?
No.
That's budgeted
Oh,
to make the adjustments
That is,
to the
yes,
salaries.
to make the, yes. Yeah.
It's a
I
line item
apologize.
to start, to implement that, start implementing with the,
Do that.
yeah, we didn't pay PSBA, it was not that. PSBA did study, and we put a placeholder to start implementing gradually to make those corrections.
Study too.
Well, we already paid that, that was,
Yeah, I said we
yeah,
had to pay.
yeah.
We pay them a lot. But this doesn't mean no good if I don't have code to find out what it is.
Oh, wait, we're gonna get to the board update, school board update, board budget update.
What?
I think,
That was what I asked for.
okay. Board
So-
budget.
So like
we're
the
gonna
key
go
card and all
there.
that stuff too, I don't know what it's for.
Okay. Are we ready? Well, we have that
Well,
next.
yeah,
so.
there's
Let's go to
a
the
line item
Yeah.
for that, so you wanna
Let's
make sure
talk
that
about that.
you close out this one.
Yeah,
It's the next one on the
yeah,
agenda.
we're actually gonna talk about that. I think that's on the agenda.
That's great. Wonderful.
I just have a couple of just questions. And I know that every year when we talk about budgets, we try to, the last thing we do is to affect, you know, the kids in the classroom and the education. So, and I'm sure we are going to get questions about this. So I would just like to have a little bit more detail maybe on when you say about we're going to change the gifted program, but we're still going to be in compliance. You know, my oldest son is 30, and so we've been dealing with gifted, you know, for how many years I've been in the district, and it seems like it changes a lot. And I know that we've always been in compliance. I think one year we had an issue where we were so understaffed with the special ed part that we were getting into some trouble with having the IEP meetings on a timely basis and all that. And I think that was, you know, part of it. But when we talk about the budget and staying away from doing things that are going to adversely affect our kids, can you maybe give just some specifics so we would have some information? Because I can almost guarantee you some of us, well, we'll all get the emails now, but just to be able to address what we're doing. So is it at the elementary level? Is it at the middle school level? Is it at the secondary level? What are the changes that you're looking at?
That is something that's going in the weekly report.
Okay, great.
Okay.
That'll go in the weekly report. All right. Any other questions or comments about the budget update?
Okay, so what we really had on for discussion and answers was primarily supposed to be related to the 2021 budget for the board. So, and I see from your report, you're probably looking at that historical thing. So just so everybody, just a refresher, is that in the January 10th newsletter, there was some information that had been requested, and so we provided that. That had the information of what had been spent with a detailed line item in the past. But for this particular conversation, we were trying to just kind of limit it to the 2021 and any questions about what is in, we call it the board budget. It is for expenditures that is where they're associated. So I will say, just want to point out, the largest item in that, what we call board budget, is the school leaders' liability insurance. And in that area, I had called our insurance agent and asked about what I should do for insurance rates for budgeting purposes. And she did recommend a 10% increase. So that is what I do have in there. Unfortunately, I did ask, and we can change this, but it has some ramifications. I did talk to her about this. At North Penn, when I worked there, we did get our quote for the next year in June, and we were able to incorporate that into the budget. Our cycle here is that we get our insurance rates in August, and I thought that was a little odd, but the agent said to me, and this is something we're thinking about, is that if you get your quotes in June, that's when all the other school districts are getting their quotes as well, and you might get lost in the shuffle, and that we get a little bit more attention when we have our renewals in August. So that is something to consider. But that is what I used. Yes, ma'am. Oops.
Monsieur, what does that mean? We might get a better rate, or?
Yes, I think she, again, was giving me a conservative rate. So those go out for quote in August, and that's when we will get our renewal rates. But I won't know what those rates are before we actually finalize the budget.
In the newsletter, we had the proposed, if you go to
Library.
if you go to the library, if you go to the library, and I believe it's,
Yeah, I can get it from
yeah.
Okay.
there.
What newsletter was it? 10?
I believe it was January 10th.
Oh,
Yeah, go to the
I don't like this website. Board teacher, extra duty, what is that?
Okay, so I have no idea. Oh, I know. Actually, I probably do have an idea why that is in there. So this does list all the codes, whether they have any budgeted amount in there or not, and that one does not have any money in it. And that would have been, I think, when Mr. Cherkasky used to come and film.
Oh, okay.
But so we don't use that anymore.
Okay, and then I had another one, just a question, so don't everybody holler at me. Especially that boy back there.
He likes getting paid.
We pay them, and yet we pay teachers to go around to various places for the children to learn a trade, and I don't think they get paid. At least they didn't used to years ago. If they worked at a place, they did it for training. No, they get paid.
I am not familiar with that. You're not talking about the technical center, career and technical center. You're not,
No. Like we have.
Mike, you all want to come up? This predates, but I'm not sure what that is.
The children that go out to work. We just got a grant to send teachers out.
Are you talking about the BEST program? The special ed children who are going out to do like internships and stuff in the community?
More than special ed kids going out. At least there used to be.
You're talking the internship program?
Yeah.
The internship program where students are going out, we do have a person that is assigned to them that does get paid to monitor them and help them be connected.
The person gets paid, but the student doesn't get paid.
Only if it's a program where they are willing to pay the student. So there's some places where they could be working to where there is pay attached to it, and then there's others where they're going out for the experience.
Okay, so back to my question is, we pay the students to come here, when to me, we could classify that as a learning experience to get credit plus experience to do the job.
So basically,
It's just-
so you're saying like the people who would film to get experience in that we could not pay them because we could say you're an intern.
The same as the stage crew, they're getting experience. We pay everybody for everything,
Okay.
and I'm just wanting to know why. We got a bad budget here, and
Maybe our
and
cameraman wants to explain. Ask him. You want to chime in?
You got to put so much emphasis on
I
that
understand.
and embarrass the
I
poor kid.
no, I understand. I understand what you're saying. You're saying what your point is that if you're getting experience through an internship, we should not feel the need to pay for that service. Okay. I understand what you're saying. Mrs. Hogan.
So, just to Mrs. Deeroff's point, I would think if that is something we were going to explore, we would have to make sure that our meetings are shorter in length and that, because these are high school kids, I'm assuming, that they would be home at a reasonable time. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, I've sat through some meetings that have gone till 11 o'clock at night. If my high school child was out interning in the evening till 11 o'clock at night, I would not be pleased. So, just something to
But
think
if they
about.
got paid, you'd be pleased.
I would not be pleased, whether they were paid or not, on a school night.
Oh, sorry, Mrs. Gordon.
I think something like this, an internship usually has a teacher supervising, and we need to incentivize somebody to show up to do this sort of thing, and pay is a good incentive.
Okay. So I think the purpose of looking at the 2021 board budget is because what we're trying to do is we're trying to look at where we can save money across the board everywhere. So I'm sure everyone's had a chance to look at this, and it looks like there have been several areas where we have seen reductions. So I guess Mrs. Giroff gave one suggestion of where we, or a question. So is there anything else that we want to discuss? Mr. Foos?
It just generally, I know that we have different internship opportunities that the district helps facilitate, and maybe it would be worth at some point. I don't know if we have any type of uniform approach to that, and maybe it's worth looking at how we do that in the different areas.
That's a good point. Mrs. Giroff?
What is the technology supplies for 15,000? And bear in mind, I can't get an agenda.
I am not seeing that.
Scroll down to the next page. Right here.
Okay, let me flip over here. Okay, so I do see in the current year that we did have 15,000 there. And I believe that, and I might need to readjust this. I based mine on where things had been charged. And I'm pretty sure that that is where the board docs went, was budgeted. And when I budgeted, I combined the board docs with the school board dues and fees. So I probably should split those out. That would be more accurate. And where we paid for it this year probably needs to be moved to that other line.
How much is that?
Board docs, I wrote down 10,500.
Is that every year?
Yes.
Let's get rid of that. I hate that. You saved $10,000 and I'm not going to that.
Well, there are a lot of
Because you'll
advantages.
pick up other costs.
We had somebody that did that well. Thanks, Ms. Pitts.
Okay.
You call me whatever you want, Mr.
Okay, is there any other questions about the line items? This is new to a lot of people, so. Does anybody have any other questions? Okay. Let's see, is that, let me go back to meetings. That was our last, and again, some of these are things that we have to take action on for the next meeting. And some of these are just informational, and we're going to be having our finance and facilities meetings on a regular basis so we can work through the budget and stay updated on the budget process and where we are, which I really appreciate, because as things get moved around, like the gifted program, as we go to look at our class sizes and all those types of things, we're going to be getting questions. So it's really nice for the board. A lot of this information comes out in our newsletter on Friday, so I would encourage everyone to read that, so when we do get questions, we can address them. And just as a clarification, now that the entire board gets a question, what I think the best practice, and Dr. Bedden, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but what I have been doing is just replying to that person, saying thank you for your concern or your comments, and board leadership will be getting back to you, and then having one response from board leadership so we can speak as a board instead of 9 individual people responding to this person. So that's, I think, as we get those questions, I think that would be our best practice. So Mr. Foose, I don't know if you want to address that, or.
Yeah, I mean, generally, as board leadership, I or Melody try to respond to any questions that come to the BASD inbox. However, I wouldn't limit it to just the two of us. I mean, we do so to make sure that a response is given, acknowledgement is made, but generally, I mean, we don't speak on behalf of the board, so any board member is free to give a response to anybody that has a question or comment.
The response should, though, include that you're responding as a member of the board, but not for the board, so that they know that there's a collective process if there's something going to happen. So obviously there's always nice to acknowledge to the person that you all have received it, because there's sometimes this false perception that people think you all don't get the emails. As you know, that as part of a non-voting member, myself and your board secretary can see them. We generally do not. It's addressed to the board, so we don't respond. Unless you all chime in and ask us or give direction to, the administration needs to respond to this. And quite honestly, I don't always see them because they're not directed to me, but it's made available that we could see it if you all have a question for us. So there are a couple times that the board leadership has said, hey, have you seen this? And I'm like, no. So I have to go look for it when they're looking for an answer, that if it overlaps into administration as they're trying to craft a response. It is important, though, that I would ask that if you do respond, you make sure every board member can see your response. That's the purpose of it, as the solicitor suggested, that there's transparency, that one, that no board member is getting something from a constituent that nobody else could see, but the benefit of everybody see what their colleagues also said. So that, and then ultimately, obviously, an action should be the collective will of the majority of the board that moves it forward.
Okay. Do we have any other committee comments? Mrs. Deeroff?
Can I ask a question now about this last board budget papers I have? How do I find out what the codes are so I know what we're paying or what the P cards are? How do I?
If you want, when we're done, I will. I know that report is a little confusing. It is there. It's just a little hard to follow. So if you want, after the meeting, I'll just show you how to look at that. Is that okay?
Okay. I don't want to hold you up though.
Oh, it's fine.
Thank you.
I have to make Mr. Foose sign some papers anyway.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Foose, and then, did you have your hand up, Ms. Murphy? Okay, yep, Mr. Foose.
I just wanted to thank our former colleague for coming out to this evening to remind us of the Gateway to Greatness. I had seen these floating around before, but I don't know that I've ever actually taken the time to read it. And I think it's important to highlight a couple of things on here, including probably the most important piece is that there was a community effort to raise money for this gateway as part of the track dedication and things of that nature, and a pretty substantial amount. There was a lot of effort that went into that, and so I think it's important that that's seen through. But just for the public, for anybody who's not aware, a pretty prominent alum of Boyertown, Mr. Carver here, was on the cross country and track teams, had some success in high school. He also went on to be an NCAA champ at Penn State. Was on the Olympic team and distinguished himself well beyond his athletics as a World War II veteran. So certainly a very prominent and great community member worth us honoring.
Thank you. Mr. Brophy?
I'd like to thank Dr. Bedden and the administration for attacking the budget through structural changes and not through cuts. I think that's the proper way to go about it. We don't want to degrade the system, but we do want to look at ways we can save money. I think that's a fine way to go about doing it. Look at the structural changes and not eliminating or degrading programs. Thank you.
So I just, for the board, because you had this question posed to you, asked the team to tell me where the status is on that. They openly admit in their response to me that after the meeting with Mr. Lewis, they've been sidetracked with all our other facility issues. So I've asked for an update on those smaller versions that they were supposed to be working on that I asked for a few months ago. So as soon as I get something, we'll get them out. But they did say that they met with you and then they got sidetracked with all these other projects.
That's certainly well understood. Thank you.
Okay, if there's no other committee comments, can I have a motion to adjourn? Mrs. Hogan, Mr. Foose seconds, and we're adjourned.